We're rolling. Claire, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
What's up? I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. This is a long time coming. Um, Before we get into some nuances about all the different ways this conversation can go, can you just give everybody listening like a brief 2 minute elevator pitch on who you are, what you do, what services you provide, and maybe even a little bit of how we know each other?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jack and I met through my husband, who's a fitness coach, and Jack was doing some ghostwriting for him about a year ago. Is that right?
A little bit over a year. Yeah.
And then you just happened to move into our neighbor's place when he was traveling. And then we just got to like chill all the time and get to know each other. And now we're like, it feels like we're siblings.
It does. It really does.
Yeah. So, a little bit about me, I help people heal trauma and also just on more of a neutral level, help them really tap into their peace and their power. So, I do this through modalities like breath work and medicine journeys to help people access non ordinary states of consciousness where you're able to tap into your subconscious mind and really make change on a deep and profound, lasting level. So there's a lot of things we can open up from that box, but
Yeah.
from the high level view, that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, I love it. And it brings up a conversation I was having with my mom yesterday around inner healing and stepping into your power and stepping into authenticity and all these things I've experienced from my own medicine journeys and non ordinary states of consciousness. And the question she posed to me, which I'm curious your thoughts on, she's like, well, I just wish people could like achieve these changes in natural states. Like, I wish you didn't have to go change your chemical state in your mind to receive these changes and to fully express yourself and to love yourself and all these things that have come for me through plant medicine. So I'm curious for you, like, what would your response be to that?
Well, you can access the same states through breath work alone. And these practices are ancient. They date back so far before us in our time. So I would argue that these states are natural. And in fact, when you look at children, when they're in a state of playfulness or curiosity, they're in very similar states of being where they're not rigid in any one way. They're just like open to the world and learning all the time. And so, a lot of the work that I help people with is actually kind of getting back to that state, which I would argue is our natural state. And we've just forgotten how to do that. And society doesn't foster an environment where people feel comfortable or natural being in that state of mind.
Mm-hmm. And why is it necessary, whether it's through breath work, whether it's through plant medicines, why is it necessary to change your state of consciousness in order to get back into that childlike state of play and to enact lasting changes for the rest of your life? Why is changing your consciousness or your state important in that?
Yeah. So, most of the time, we're just in waking consciousness. You can think of it as your default mode. So there's a network in the brain. It's called your default mode network. And this is how most of us are operating all the time. And it's not a bad thing. It's just the way that our mind works in order to create efficiency with life. So you can think of it as, having this sort of baseline state of planning ahead and prioritizing things, sort of task ordering things. There's also an element of self consciousness with the default mode network, which is a survival mechanism, which again, it's a good thing because it helps us separate self from other so that we can survive in the world, so that we cannot be cast out from the tribe, essentially, is how this evolved. So the default mode network helps us get through the day. It helps us achieve things. It helps us um, create efficiency when we're working on things so that we're not like diverting energy to things that don't matter in that very focused particular moment. But this default mode now just kind of runs the show for most people for all of their lives. So, the reason why it's important to create space for these practices to access a non ordinary state of consciousness is because these states of consciousness actually quiet that default mode so that we can tap into our limbic brain, which is more of the emotional center of the brain, where you can actually start to make lasting change. So there's a lot to it. If you have any like avenues you want to take from what I just said, I'm happy to go deeper.
Yeah. What I'm curious about is like the idea of changing your state of consciousness is so scary to
Mm-hmm.
people who have not changed their state of consciousness. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'd be curious to know how you would go about that type of conversation when you tell somebody about what type of work you do, whether it's through breath work or medicines, and you bring up that you're going to be in an altered state of consciousness. That sounds super scary, right? And
Yeah.
so how can you like quiet those fears in people who have not experienced that?
I so get that. First of all, if anyone's listening to this and has that same thought, or maybe like did at one point have that thought, I remember the moment that my partner, who's I'm now married to, when he told me that he had done mushrooms for the first time. And I was like, who the fuck am I like dating right now? Like, this is ridiculous and so odd because I was always like the goody goody girl. Like, I didn't smoke weed in high school. I was straight A student. Like, that was just who I was. That was my identity. Um, so then to be like starting to date this person and for him to also really have that identity, graduated college with double major, straight 4.0, gave the commencement speech at graduation. Like he was like the ideal good person. And to hear that just like broke my view of reality. I'm like, wow, this person that I really admire and a lot of people respect has done mushrooms. Like, interesting. So I think when it comes to altered states of consciousness and the way that they sound scary, I know for me personally, it was because the way that I viewed them was like I was going to lose myself if I ever went into that state. And I was like, oh, it's going to make me like this person that I'm not, or it's going to make me do crazy things, or it's going to make me go insane, because that is what propaganda essentially has made us all believe. And I'll be the first to admit, if you're not careful with them, if you're an idiot using these substances, sure, like maybe you've got contraindications, maybe there's something like physically with you where certain substances aren't a good fit. So it's important to have that level of care. But if none of that's there, and if you have a baseline skill set with meditation or somatics or even just basic breath awareness, then these altered states of consciousness, they don't make you lose your mind in the way
Mm-hmm.
that society has helped like made us all believe. Basically, what I've come to know is that they actually help you go even deeper into the most authentic parts of yourself. And for most people, I'll say for many people, they also help you tap into like a direct line of communication and connection with a higher power. So it's a beautiful, beautiful experience.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said too and beautifully articulated. Something that I think is eye opening to those who have not experienced any altered state or plant medicine is when you hear somebody talk about it that on the surface you would never expect to be doing drugs, right? And like people, if you're watching this, it's like Claire does not look like some hippie drug addict, right? She looks like a pretty normal person, maybe me myself too. And that is, I think, a big gateway into opening your mind enough to be able to be open enough to experiment with this. Because for me, it took hearing two NFL players I looked up to talking about how it changed their life in a positive way for me to open up to it. So For me, it was like Aaron Rodgers talking about his ayahuasca journeys and other plant medicine ceremonies on Aubrey Marcus's podcast and Joe Rogan's. And it was also Pat McAfee. He runs like a big NFL show now. He was a punter in the NFL for a long time. And he said he credited mushrooms with getting him into the NFL. And so for me, when I heard those two guys talk about it and how it influenced their football careers, I was like, okay, this sounds like a tool I can maybe use to improve my football career. But it ended up actually being the reason I ended my football career. Funny enough. But I think finding people that you trust and you look up to and you want to be like, and you realize they're sane and you realize they're doing good things in the world, and they approach the medicines from that specific perspective of personal growth and transformation, that's the key. And so a big thing for me has been distinguishing the reasons and the intentions behind why would you even want to alter your state in general. And so I remember in high school, like 16, 17 years old, I had friends in my friend group that tried mushrooms, they were doing LSD, they were trying MDMA, but it was purely for the purposes of like partying and like watching cartoons and like getting fucked up. And so I labeled it all as bad, right? And then when I've come full circle and I realized, oh, it's all about the intention behind the use. And when you use it in an intentional way, it can be very profound to change your life. And it has been for me. So I'm curious for you, like, okay, so you find out your boyfriend Sam at the time is has used psychedelic mushrooms, psilocybin. What was the point where you were like, okay, I'm open to trying this, and why did you try it, and what was your first experience like?
Yeah, so I was just beginning my meditation journey at that time. Sam introduced me to meditation also, and that was really important. It was like, okay, this person who I trust and admire and respect, and who also was doing like 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreats when he was like 20 years old. It's like, okay, this guy's got something figured out. So I'm open to this and I just want to learn more about it. So I think Michael Pollan had like just released his book, How to Change Your Mind, or maybe it was just shortly after that. So I remember reading through that entire book and I told him, I'm like, I'm down to try these. I just want to fully understand like as much as I can about what the experience is going to be like what's happening in my brain psychology, like what is happening on a physical level when I'm consuming these so that I know how to have a positive experience. And so I read the whole book. It's really fucking dense. If anyone's ever not read it before, it gets really dense when it gets into the history. But it was so illuminating to actually understand like what was going on in what's called the second wave of psychedelics, the first wave being like traditional ceremonies with these substances, the second wave being like the 50s, 60s with psychedelics, and then now what's happening today is considered like the third wave of psychedelics. So I read that whole book. I was like super down by that point because Michael Pollan just did a phenomenal job of laying out from a really neutral perspective, like the science, the history, his personal experience trying them for the first time. So I remember I took like 2 grams in Tofino on Vancouver Island. This was in like 2018. And just had the most beautiful, blissful experience, just admiring nature and being in connection with each other. And it was like after that experience where my consciousness just kind of like opened a little bit to what life feels like when it's not just Claire. It's like the world doesn't revolve around Claire. And my world just like opened up in that way. My meditation practice just like skyrocketed after that. And that's when, you know, it was uphill from there.
I want to double click on something you just said there. It's like the world doesn't revolve around Claire. I had never
Yeah.
actually articulated that or like realized that that's the same sensation I felt during my experience. It's like you go from thinking you are the center of the world to, oh, I'm just a part of this world experiencing it. I'm part of this entire experience. And that depersonalization is like could be kind of scary, but at the same time, it's so liberating. It's so
Mhm.
liberating. And when you described like the beautiful, blissful state and the connection, I literally felt it go through my body because that's how I felt like nearly every single time that I've experimented with any of these things. So you also hit on, I want to get into like the history a tiny bit because you know more than I. So I'm very curious to know. So the first wave was very ceremonial, ancient cultures, tribes, etc. The second wave, which I actually have dug a little bit into, like in the 50s, 60s, Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, like that whole movement fascinates me. So I want to know more about this third wave. Like, what would you describe the third wave of the psychedelic revolution or the psychedelic sphere as? And how do you see it evolving in the coming decade?
Yeah. So, what was really tragic about the second wave, just kind of backtracking to that for a minute, is that there was some fucking incredible research happening with mental health and psychedelics. And Timothy Leary is generally known as the guy who kind of fucked it all up by making it very politicized and um, just making it a little messy with the way that he went about it. And it was unfortunate. People got hurt because they weren't taking these substances with proper care and intention. So things just got really messy with that second wave. And somebody that I really look up to who's been really fostering this third wave of psychedelics is Rick Doblin.
Mm,
And Rick Doblin, I'm testing my like memory now of the exact story, but he wanted to make a change in this area and realized very quickly that the fastest way to do that would actually to be to go into basically the belly of the beast and get into the legal landscape. So he's been so calculated with really creating an opening in society for these medicines to come back online. And he and his team, he founded an organization called MAPS, which stands for Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And they've been doing years and years and years of research, particularly with MDMA for veterans with PTSD is more commonly known, some of the research that they've been doing, but they've also done a lot of research as well with women who have been victims of sexual abuse. And they very intentionally chose MDMA as the substance, one, because it's a little bit less stigmatized than mushrooms or LSD. Two, because it's not a classic psychedelic, so you don't have like the full ego dissolution experience or the crazy visuals that people experience on something like LSD or mushrooms. And three, because it's a heart opener. And that has very profound effects in the healing of trauma and PTSD. And there's other ways that MDMA interacts with brain chemistry that are very effective, specifically for the purpose of healing and transformation in more of a replicable and calculated way. So they've been doing these studies for years, and now it's actually to the point where it's likely going to be legalized for clinical therapeutic use, I would say by next year at latest.
that's so exciting. It's so
Yeah.
exciting. And something else that is exciting is I don't really know anything about this Rick Doblin guy. And so you have a new rabbit hole that you're sending me down. So thank you.
Yeah.
And the rabbit hole you've already kind of sent me down with that book, A Dose of Hope, the story about MDMA psychotherapy, blowing my mind. I'm like recommending it to everybody. Like my mom is going to read it. A bunch of friends are like, I'm going to check it out. So it's cool to see that in this third wave, it seems like the people who are pioneering it are pioneering the wave with wisdom rather than in the 60s. It was very like bombastic and erratic, it seems, from what I've learned about Timothy Leary and like the entire movement that was happening in California. So it seems like Austin might be the central hub for this going forward, like San Francisco was back then.
Yeah, Austin's a pretty central hub. But one thing that I meant to share that I forgot is in like the thing that distinguishes this second or this third wave from the second wave truly is the care that's put into it. And people like Tim Ferriss, who, and people like Aubrey Marcus, who, at least in my world, are like, and Joe Rogan, I guess, like the biggest, they have the biggest platforms for sharing their personal experience, and they've really influenced in a positive way a lot of people to make significant change and transformation in their lives just by sharing their personal experience.
Yeah.
But you can hear it in the way they talk about it. They're very clear that this is not for everyone. And like, please don't fuck it up, is basically what they're saying. Like, it's happened before, and people are wanting this to open up in society in a way that's very intentional and safe. So that's like the biggest difference.
Yeah, and it's like the stakes are so high, and the people who have experienced it and have those platforms, the stakes are so high, and they have to be very calculated with their words because of the profound changes they've seen. And like I can speak for that myself. Like if I had never experimented with these plant medicines in this intentional way, I'd still be in college right now. I'd be on my way to a finance job. I'd probably still be
Yeah.
super anxious and depressed and all those things. And these medicines have really unlocked things in me that I don't think I would have been able to without these medicines as tools. And so another figure that you didn't mention, but somebody who actually got me more interested in specifically MDMA was Andrew Huberman, because him and Tim Ferriss, I believe, did a podcast maybe about a year ago. I listened to it probably a little bit over a year ago in Argentina. I remember listening to it. And he had mentioned that he had done like I believe six private MDMA healing sessions, right? And I think he had a lot of things from his childhood, like parents had abandoned him, right? And it really helped him, from what he said, work through those things. And for me, it's like once I hear an authoritative figure who I respect like that, like Andrew Huberman's not just some like drug guy on the side of the street, right? He's like top neuroscientist professor at Stanford in the world, and he's talking about how these medicines have changed his life. So that always gives me the indicator of like, okay, if he believes I can move forward, I will move forward. So in terms of like, let's talk specifically about MDMA. So you mentioned that it's likely going to be legalized, and the tests and trials have been done for people with like severe PTSD, war veterans, potentially women with sexual abuse or trauma. I'm curious how you perceive it as like the average person, let's say somebody who hasn't been to war and had PTSD, or somebody who hasn't experienced intense emotional or sexual or physical abuse. Do you see MDMA being a powerful medicine, even for the average person that might say, "Oh, my life was not that bad"?
Yeah, 100%. Honestly, there's a part of me that thinks that could be even more powerful, because think of the average person, and sometimes I have to remind myself that I live in a bubble,
Yeah.
and everyone I interact with on a daily basis is very healthy, very fit, very self aware, very intelligent, playful, likes to have fun, like has a vibrant outlook on life. And so sometimes I have to remind myself, like, if I walk through the mall, like that's the average population. And it's a very different energy, like being in the thick of the mall than like being in our friend group here in Austin. But yeah, so thinking about the average person, they likely are, they likely take at least one prescription medication. They likely have um, at least a few rifts in the family dynamic, even if it's to the level of like, oh, I just like hate being around this person, or like Uncle Joe's so annoying, or like this or that. And there's just this general outlook on life that like everyone else is getting it wrong or like stupid, whether it's politics or this or that. And that creates such a density in just like your daily experience when you're holding on to so much. And there tends to also be this subconscious, constantly running program of, I need to be right and I need to look good to everyone around me because that's a survival mechanism. It's like I need to maintain my sense of rightness. And that's where you get into frustrations and arguments and annoyances and um, disputes at Thanksgiving, whatever it is. And I need to look good. And that's where we have an entire society of people walking around just like so self conscious all the time. And then you experience MDMA in if it's in proper set and setting and you're working with your breath and you're not just like viewing it as a magic pill. When a person feels their heart expand to that level for the first time, there is nothing like it. There's nothing like that feeling for the first time of feeling fully alive and connected to your motherfucking heart. And that's a feeling that I wish for every person in this world.
Mm. Again, I have like major chills as you said that, like almost like literally tears. Like I feel the emotions coming up. And the funniest thing is, I would not have been able to feel these emotions in my body before using this MDMA as a medicine, right?
Yeah.
Like I was somebody for a very long time, like super in my masculine frame, very stoic, like didn't tap into my emotions, was living from my head 99% of the time, didn't feel my heart open since like maybe high school. And as you say that, and you say like it, you feel like you're alive for like the first time, or you're more alive than you've ever felt. It just resonates with me on such a deep level. So maybe we could both talk about some things that unlocked for each of us individually for in our journeys and experiences with MDMA as this healing medicine. So I want to ask you first, and then I can share a bit of my story. But first time you experienced MDMA, what was the context? How did you feel? What did it unlock for you? And how has that progressed over time to today? And how has it actually changed your daily life off of the medicine?
Such a good question. So, I'm going to actually share two experiences. And it's funny because we were just with a friend recently and I was sharing this story with you guys. But the first time I experienced MDMA, it was okay. It was like a little fun. We were at a concert, it was outside, like an outdoor concert thing in Toronto. And that was back when I was still drinking alcohol, which now I haven't drank alcohol in about 5 years. But yeah, it was like, it was a good time. I was like, I can see why people like this, but it wasn't life changing. And even then, like I had been meditating for like consistently daily for over a year at that point, and still, like, it was just okay. Flash forward a couple months later, and I had an experience at a concert, a different concert in Toronto, with a very specific artist called Ben Bomer. If anyone's ever heard of him, I'm obsessed. So, deep place in my heart. And we actually mixed MDMA with LSD. And I had stopped drinking by that point, which I do feel is a very pivotal part of the contrast between these experiences. But that night was the, if not the most, then one of the top three most significant spiritual experiences of my life. And a lot of people might think that's insane, like being at a deep house music concert with MDMA and LSD, and like, but it just cracked me open. And the frequency of the music, first of all, it like the music itself is very moving, and even though it's electronic, there's kind of like this orchestral element to it. And then the lights and just like everything, feeling my heart that open, combined with this like spiritual connection that the LSD helped like crack open in that environment, was just unforgettable. And I have never been able to look at meditation or breath work or even just myself as like a spiritual being. I've never been able to look at them the same ever since that experience. So, flash forward to today, and because of that experience, we actually will like kind of foster that environment with our friends when we go out to concerts, and specifically like Anjuna Deep music label concerts. We're not going to like, I don't know, we're not seeing like Dua Lipa and doing this, you know.
Yeah.
But we'll do breath work before and we'll set intentions before. And you were there in February, right? And then again in March. And we got to share that experience together of like being in this concert setting and working with these medicines and using intentionally that language of like working with these substances. Because again, it's not a magic pill to me. It's not like this thing that I just take to have a good time, even though that's part of it. And something that Rick Doblin actually said at a panel, he was in Austin recently, and I got invited to this really intimate panel that he did for South by. And he said, who's to say where the line gets to be drawn between spirituality and play?
Mm, what a
And I was
legend.
like, damn. That's right. Who's to say? So, kind of just like tying this with a bow, in at least that setting, MDMA has helped me tap into my femininity. It has had profound um, effects in my relationship and just like the connectedness and just feeling that love on just a bone deep level. And it's connected me really deeply with my friends. It's helped me connect to truth and helped me establish more of a clear, grounded relationship with expressing in a true and authentic way to myself. And there's so much more I could go on about, but those are a few.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I resonate so deeply with so much of what you said. And a question that came to mind is like, is there even a difference between spirituality and play? Like, I don't think there is. I was talking with my current spiritual meditation coach, you could call him, and I was talking to him about how some parts of my day are spiritual and some parts aren't. And he was like, it's all spiritual. Like, folding your socks is spiritual. Like, brushing your teeth is spiritual, right? And so it's like, who is to draw that line and make that distinction when they're all really just the same thing. Yeah, I guess I kind of want to go into my experience with those first couple concerts that I went to with you. So back in February, Claire and Sam invited me and my friend Tyler, roommate, to our first like EDM, like techno rave type of show. And I had no idea what to expect. I had
Let's get it right though. It's deep house.
Deep House. Okay, see, I don't even really know the distinctions yet. Deep House and Juna Deep. The artist was Marsh, to be exact. Incredible experience. But anyway, so I had gone into this experience, never had taken MDMA before. And I was open to it and I was curious, a little bit nervous just because, like, anytime you try something new, you don't know what's going to happen. But I felt comfortable because I was with this group of 10 people who are much older than me. They've experienced this a lot, and I felt like held and safe. So I had the same experience as you for the first time. I took it, both MDMA and LSD together. And what I could say is like the first 20 minutes of the show, when I was kind of on that come up, I felt horrible. Like I wanted to leave. I felt super self-conscious. I felt anxious. And that was when Sam came up to me. He's like, yo, you want to come up with the group? And I was like, sure, whatever, I'll try. I was literally about to get ready to leave. I was telling Tyler, yo, I got to leave. Like, this is not my scene. But luckily, Sam came, brought me up. I felt seen at that moment, which was really powerful. And then I've written a whole newsletter about this. But what essentially happened was there was another girl in the friend group there with us, and she like switched spots with me. She's like, you need to like protect my energy during this show. And I was like, okay, like that's interesting. I've never experienced that before. And so for the next 4 hours, like as the medicine started to kick in, I grounded deeper into like my masculine core and masculine energy than I ever had felt in my entire life. I've always had a concept of like, what does it mean to be masculine, but I never felt it. And it was this feeling of I'm here to hold space for her to express herself fully and completely, but I'm not here to like take advantage or try to like get with anybody. Like it was just I want to hold this safe space for her, and be on the lookout for like making sure everything's okay, but also have a great time myself. And my heart completely cracked open in that first experience. Just with like, oh my gosh, I have so much love for these people. I have so much love for this music. I have so much love for watching this girl express herself. And something that actually broke my brain was how she mentioned to me, she's like, oh, you don't have to take anything. I'm not taking anything. And to see somebody expressing themselves that freely without any medicine or any drug or any altered state of consciousness was really eye opening for me of like, oh, wait, like I've realized I've been repressing expressing my true self for so long. And she showed me what that would look like to embody that state. And so that night was incredibly mind opening, incredibly heart opening. And then the next month, when we went to that other concert, and then I just danced by myself, that was starting to turn the lens or the awareness inward a little bit more. Because that first concert, it was like purely outward attention. The next time it was like, oh, I'm just dancing by myself now. Now I can just focus on myself. And for the first time, like I actually danced and I felt okay with that because I felt so self-conscious. And I think that is something for so many men we struggle with is we're so self-conscious about expressing ourselves, about moving freely, about speaking our mind. And just to be able to go beyond that and see what it feels like and realize, oh my God, I've been repressing this my whole life. That was extremely powerful. And then we went back the next night, the night after, and I went sober and I danced just as freely. And that was like showing me the power of the medicine because it shows you what it would feel like to be in that state. But what you realize is you don't need it to stay in that state, but it just shows you for the first time. Um, and then that got me more and more curious to keep going inward. And then I had my own inward, you could say like therapy, MDMA blindfolded session about a month after that. So I'm curious for you, like, what are the differences you've seen in me from before the first concert to like how you know me now?
Hmm. What is funny that you mentioned about like the dancing is I definitely made like an inner note of like at the first show, like, oh, Jack's not really dancing. Like
Hmm.
he's just like he looks like he's having a good time. Like he smiles when I look over at him, but I'm like, dun, 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 and like you were just like
I was just like trying to digest, like, what is going on here? I couldn't even think about dancing.
Yeah, and then the second show, I saw you, like, crack open a little bit more, and then the third show, yeah, we all weren't on anything and just, like, vibing the absolute most, arguably even more than I was
Yeah,
dancing the night before that.
literally.
So, yeah, I've definitely felt the shift in your lightness and openness, and, like, there's this excitement for life, like, this genuine just excitement about life
Hmm.
that has really unlocked in you, and not that you were, like, uh, tired, fatigued, like, unexcited guy before, and I think that's where especially the older generation can get a little bit locked up around these substances, and even breath work can help you access that state too, but it's like, oh, I'm doing just fine, I don't need this, or like, oh, will it do something to my brain that will permanently alter the way, like, yeah, it could, but in a positive way. um so yeah, I just those are the biggest reflections that I would share, just this like excitement for life that's really unlocked in you over the past
Yeah,
few months.
I appreciate that reflection. And the lightness comment is so true. Like before any of these experiences, for the past year, maybe like 4 years, I would say, like after high school football to like going into college football, from the time I entered college football until this February, maybe at that first concert, I felt this constant heaviness and dread for life. Like life was something I had to grit my teeth and go against rather than something that I could flow with and it could be easy and it could be light. Like I think the whole notion that like life has to be hard, it's complete bullshit. It's complete bullshit because after I've experienced this increased lightness, I've seen better external results for the things that I was trying to force for so long. And especially since my solo journey, I'd say 2 weeks ago, like the way I'm getting out of bed is different. Like the way I approach client calls is different. The way I approach writing is different, building, doing this podcast, because it's like, it's not work, it's play. And that's what really came up for me. It's like, this is all play. It's not to be taken so seriously. It's supposed to be a creative act and a creative expression, but I was not able to see the world that way until I unlocked in myself the self love and the self acceptance, and that I don't have to perform for anybody outside of myself, which is where all the heaviness comes in. So I know I really appreciate that reflection. And like, I appreciate you guys for showing me this world, because it's completely opened me up and changed my life.
Yeah. It's an honor, right? It's like the coolest thing ever. And I will share too, just on that thread of being excited about life. And you asked a couple questions ago about the potential that these non-ordinary states of consciousness have for people who don't have real trauma and they're already functioning very well in the world. They just feel like they're missing that deeper level of connection and like vitality. So in addition to private one on one work with people, I also host retreats for women. They're located in Oregon, and I do this with a friend who's a co facilitator for these immersions. And there was one woman in particular in our last group, which we just wrapped up a week ago, and we're continuing on with 4 months of integration workshopping now. And she's an account executive at a tech sales company, a very popular tech sales company. She makes great money. She's got a great place that she lives in Vancouver. She has great friends. She travels the world. She's like absolutely killing it by all means in life, but felt like something was missing. And so she comes to this immersion. And the day after our medicine journey, she sits down for breakfast and she takes a bite of her egg for breakfast. And she's like just in awe. She goes, "Does it always taste like this?" She's like, "It's so good." And then she's just like gets overwhelmed with this sensation of just like being in her body and feeling fully alive, that she steps outside, and my co-facilitator and I step outside with her, and it's just like kind of misty raining. It's like this beautiful spring Oregon day. Picture just like a beautiful nature scene out the back of this beautiful retreat property. And she just, if you're watching the video of this, you can look at me, but for those who aren't seeing the video, I'll describe it. She stands in this misting rain with her arms open and her face like fully turned up to the sky, and is just smiling with tears running down her face. And she just is doing that for probably 10 minutes, just breathing and crying and smiling and like being in disbelief. And then she turns to us and she just says, "I feel everything." And she shared with us after that she didn't know it was even possible to feel that much life in her body.
Wow. It's like literally making me emotional, this story. Like, because we go through life just like on this treadmill, and it's like, she sounds like a very ambitious, successful type of person, and I see it in myself, and that's why I think it resonates so much. It's like, we go through life trying to achieve everything, and we live in the future, and we forget that this is actually all that exists right now. And
Yeah.
that's where all the joy is. That's where all the emotions are. That's where all the peace is. It's like here right now. It's not in the future. It's not in some future vacation, future destination. There's nowhere to go. It's all right here. And we need to be reminded of that. And that's why I think your work is so powerful, because it can remind people of what they already intrinsically know, but they've forgotten.
Hmm. Yeah. And I totally like I get it. The people who might be more like corporate, intellectual minded, who hear a lot of these like spiritual things, like right now is the only thing that's real, like be here now. And on an intellectual level, they get it, but they're also kind of like
Yeah.
missing the point because they're not in their body with it and they haven't felt that like lived experience of it. And so that's really where I've found my niche to kind of lie. Like my mastery in this work seems to lie in being the bridge for people who are more in that like hustle mode or just like really high achievers, or maybe they're like kind of more in the corporate sphere and just really desire to feel that in their body because they know intellectually that it's possible and they hear people talking about this stuff, but they don't have a lived experience of it. So they're like, what's wrong with me? Or is this just like not something that's possible for me? And then I think because I approach this from a very grounded, like level perspective, I think it's helpful for those kinds of people to be able to relate to this work in a supportive way.
Mm. And with the woman who you gave as the example, she felt something was missing. What do you think it was that was missing?
For her, there was a level of just like really being in her body and loving herself to the fullest.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing is like, if you have unconscious beliefs, you're not going to know they're there because that's literally what unconscious means. It's like you're not conscious that they're even there. But we all have unconscious beliefs about the world. Like some people unconsciously believe that money is the root of all evil, or some people unconsciously believe that all men are assholes, or some people unconsciously believe that I'm not deserving of good things. Some people unconsciously believe that anytime something good happens, something bad is just around the corner because what comes up must come down. And these things are not objectively true. They're true if you look for proof of them being true. So, what these non ordinary states of consciousness allow you to do is the way that I describe it for people is you go into this space where your default mode network has an opportunity to dissolve away. And that's what you see on brain scans when people are in these states, whether it's breathwork or psilocybin or whatever. The default mode network and the brain activity that normally happens when you're in your ruminating thought patterns in like a normal daily consciousness state, it dissolves away. And on brain scans in these states, you start to see all these new connections start to form between parts of the brain that don't normally talk to each other. So, what you're doing when you go into a breathwork journey or a medicine ceremony, or you work with these substances at a concert in a very intentional, supportive way, is you are breaking your current view of reality and you're shattering it so that afterwards you can go back and put the pieces back together one by one like a puzzle in a way that's supportive for what you actually want out of life.
Mm.
And that is integration, which is like a whole other rabbit hole. But people who might be interested in plant medicines, you've probably heard of integration, and that's where you go back in and make the thing whole again, but in a new way that's supportive for what you want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the new insights you come to about yourself, about the world, life will instantly test you too. Of like, do you really believe what you just came to in this experience? And are you going to live up to that standard? And that's, I think, where a lot of the integration and work comes in. Um, a question I also want to ask, and I'm curious your thoughts on. There's two questions. I'm going to start with this one. Once you have an experience like this, and I sense it in myself, and that's why I want to ask your opinion. There can be a desire of like, I want to keep experiencing this. I want to go back. I need more. I need to keep experiencing this. And like, I sense that that is a very slippery slope. And so, how do you approach these experiences with wisdom and make sure it stays in the container of real inner work and medicine and intention and doesn't slide into abuse and escapism?
I love that you're asking this question. This is a really important topic. So, especially here in Austin, there's a lot of people who do drugs a lot. Like, that's just a fact. There's a big spiritual community here, and it can be a slippery slope between like using these medicines as tools and then using them to escape life. And I see a lot of the latter, actually. I see a lot of the escaping, and I see a lot of, going back to ayahuasca ceremonies like 30 times a year. And it's like, well, have you integrated it yet? Like, did it work? Did you find what you're looking for? And that's where I love integrating breath work into this work, because it's the reminder that you don't need a substance, first of all, to be able to access these states. I've had profound experiences using just my breath alone, and I have clients as well who have experienced the same. But I think in just like reflecting in your own being, kind of where you're at is, first of all, in your last journey, if you have journeyed before, have you integrated what you experienced? Have you made a change? And also in reflecting is just like, do you feel like you have to have it? Do you feel like you have to do ayahuasca? Do you feel like you have to do this or that? Because if there's like this neediness for it, then that's a different energy than, let's say, like when I go into a medicine ceremony, I feel the same way about it as when I go into a breathwork journey or a really good meditation. It's like I'm excited to
Hmm.
expand my perception of like what's possible in life,
Yeah,
rather
it's like,
than I'm just going to fix myself.
right. It's more like openness and curiosity and no expectations and just exploration rather than it's Friday night. I'm going to go get a 6 pack of beer, that energy. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so valuable to for people to be educated on and sit with themselves with, because like once you experience something so profound one time, you keep wanting to go back. But also like now I'm more curious on the breathwork side of things because for whatever reason, like I've not got into it myself. And I feel maybe it's because it sounds like work, like breath work. It sounds like it's a lot of effort. Um, and I just maybe I don't actually know enough about it. So like for somebody who hasn't really done any breath work, like what are some of those initial benefits that they could see, and what are some initial practices that people could start with?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to distinguish is just what I'm talking about when I say breath work, because
Yeah.
there's so many different kinds of breath work. And it is a good thing to just play around, see what you like best. Just like yoga, there's different kinds of yoga. So, like, go to a hot yoga studio, go try a yin class, like, see what you actually like. But when I refer to a breathwork journey, what I'm talking about is breathing in and out through your mouth in a conscious, connected way, deep and full, like that, for about 45 minutes. And what that allows you to do is activate the limbic brain, where you process memories outside of a sense of time. So emotions might start to come to the surface that aren't actually like present day emotions. It's just stuck energy that hasn't had the chance to fully close in the body mind system. So I work with the breath. I also, in my own practice and with clients, I support people with somatic techniques like grounding touch or tapping, which is along similar lines as like acupuncture. There's meridian lines through the system where energy can either flow or there can be energy blockages. So I work with tapping, I work with grounding touch, and then I also work with vocal toning, which can be like humming or oohing or eyeing or just having an audible exhale. And that can send vibration through the body and help harmonize in the same way that, let's say, a sound bowl might. So in these journey spaces, sometimes the biggest takeaway for a client, maybe who hasn't done much somatic work in that way, their biggest takeaway might just be, can I stay present with my breath for 45 minutes?
Yeah, it's a long time.
It's a long time, but come back to the stimulation of the limbic brain, which doesn't cling to time in the same way that your prefrontal cortex does. So most people experience that as, it's like, whoa, I thought that was like 10 minutes. It like goes by in the blink of an eye. In the same way that MDMA does that, it's like, whoa, that was 6 hours. That felt like two, or like
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
fascinating. I'm going to try that out. I'm going to try out this 45-minute session.
well, I mean, here's the thing, like, start small, start with 10 minutes.
Hmm.
There's a really awesome practice that I like to teach people who I learned from my mentors, who are Hella Weston and Lucas Mack from Awaken Breathwork, who are the most integral embodied people I know in this space. And I really admire and look up to them. And it's also been really cool to work directly with them because now I help them co facilitate 100 to 200 person events all across America. And they have a practice called Awaken Daily, where you do 10 of those deep breaths, you hold for 10 seconds, and then you do 20 of those breaths, hold for 20 seconds, and then you do 30 of those breaths and hold for 30 seconds. And even something like that, it takes 5 minutes and it can completely transform your state.
Mm,
But if anybody wants to just like try out a practice or is interested in breathwork, then I can also share the link to the free trial that I have for my breathwork platform. And it's got tons of practices that vary in length from 5 minutes all the way up to a 60-minute journey. I think there's also like a full 2 hour workshop in there too, if anyone's
wow.
curious.
Yeah, I'll link that below. And I'm curious myself too. That's
There you
incredible.
go.
I, I did have actually like one profound breathwork experience with a friend in Costa Rica. It was a few days before I was going to my ayahuasca ceremony. And so I wanted to try it. And we basically laid down. We did like 15, or no, it was like maybe 50 quick Wim Hof type of breaths, like really quick in out the nose. Um, and then we would do like longer inhale, exhale, and then at the end we would hold. And we did a 30-second hold, then repeated the cycle, then a minute, repeated the cycle, minute 30 hold, and then 2-minute hold. And I was like, I've never held my breath for this long. This is incredible. And it felt by the end of it that I was in the same state I would get into when I was on mushrooms. And
Yeah.
so that was like, whoa, this is kind of crazy. I've kind of forgot about it now for like the last 7 months, 8 months, but now it's coming back into my awareness. So I'm going to definitely look into it.
I will add to that too. People who have experienced psychedelics likely will experience breathwork differently than people who haven't. Because the profound thing about those medicines is that they open a doorway in your consciousness that you can go back into without that substance.
Interesting.
So that's where like pairing them with a meditative practice or with somatic practice can be powerful to help anchor that into the body.
Fascinating. Okay, that makes so much more sense. So like those portals have been open, now they're open, now you just have to get back into them. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Last thing I wanted to ask you before we hop is somebody, if they've listened to the whole thing here, they're probably very curious to like not only start maybe experimenting with breathwork, but are curious to start experimenting with different plant medicine, psychedelics, and altered state of consciousness. So for somebody that's curious and hasn't experimented with it, like what advice or guidance would you give them? Like now that their curiosity's open, they're like maybe going to start seeking something out.
Mhm. Yeah, start with breath work for sure, because there's an off switch on breath work, and it's important to at least have a very established meditation practice before going into these. But breathwork can also be a great place to start. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I'm sure Jack will link me below.
Yeah.
I also offer microdosing coaching for people if that's of interest as well, to help integrate that experience and track progress. And also just learn everything you can, because books like How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan and A Dose of Hope by Dr. Dan Engel, these books are really powerful for helping you understand what's actually going on the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual levels, and will help you feel safe within the experience because you have that holistic awareness of the medicine.
Mm, yeah, that's so good. And I'll link those books below, and I'll also link Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind documentary on Netflix, which was like very powerful for me to watch before my first experience to become more comfortable and open to it. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean, the best advice I could say is proceed with caution. Like,
Yeah.
nail the set, and setting. Like your mindset, your intentions, where you're at, who you're with. It's so important. And be comfortable sitting with your thoughts beforehand. Like, have a meditation practice, like Claire said. But this was an incredibly enlightening conversation. I feel like much lighter and energized after, per usual, after we talk. So, Claire, this was so fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I'm feeling like amped up to really start sharing more about this work too. So, if
Hmm.
anyone's interested in breath work, feel free to check out the free trial in the description or wherever you're going to send that out. And then, if you're interested in immersions with non ordinary states of consciousness, and if you are a woman, then definitely reach out about those as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll send everybody in the description to your pages. And the last thing, if you're not a woman and if you're a man, you can fill out a survey form that I've created, as I may be starting to step into this type of work myself. So I'll leave it at that. Claire, thank you. This was awesome. We'll have to do it again in person at some point. But thank you.
100%. See you guys.